Layoffs. Let's talk about them, because not only are they uninspired solutions to financial problems of a company, they're actually costly solutions to companies, which seems counterproductive because the whole point of layoffs in the first place is to cost cut and save the company money, right? And so I want to really look at all of this, the data and things like that, as much as I could to understand layoffs, right? Why do they happen? Because they've been around for, quite a while at this point, decades, in terms of it being a go-to solution, whenever a company is in financial trouble, of like, we'll just lay people off, a percentage of the workforce, blah, 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 blah. But especially this year, that seems to be a tactic happening, in government, across the private sector, and so forth. So I really want to examine this of, is this actually good in any capacity, right? Because we can certainly look at it from the moral perspective, where, by letting so many people go, obviously there's the aspect that now those people have been laid off and they're looking for work. But then also the people that are within the company, right? There's an erosion of engagement, employee trust, and that's not very helpful, right? Either, because one of the things that I always find with layoffs is there's this funny thing where not only does the company still expect to do all the things that they were doing, but then also in an effort to increase profitability, scale more, right? So then you have people that remain taking on more tasks of the people that have left, and then also now being assigned new things generally, right? And also, just in the greater sense of that trust and honesty, right? We look to leadership to steady the ship and to avoid these things. And when it happens, that trust fades away, and you start to feel undervalued and stuff like that, because there's always like a weird dichotomy. Various people that I talk to that work in corporate, it's almost like clockwork. Every December, we're celebrating, we were number one in this, number one in that. And then come January, it's like the headwinds are strong, so we're going to have to make some tough decisions. We're all going to have to hunker down and blah, 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 right? And so there's that aspect of it. But let's also kind of examine the voluntary turnover, right? When you start to signal that you're doing layoffs, and there's various companies that do, multiple rounds of layoffs, round 1, round 2, round 3, within, let's say, even a year, right? Might seem like kind of elongated time, but it's not really. And so that trust starts to diminish, and then the people that are there, they start to see that, okay, am I on a sinking ship? Am I going to be, eventually laid off as well, and stuff like that? And so they start to look for other jobs, and so you start to lose those people as well, right? Which, from a company's perspective, maybe they weren't expecting to lose that person. Maybe it's a very good person, and so now they have to replace that person. And a big hidden cost that companies don't often think about, that leadership doesn't often think about, is the hiring process. To find the right person and to onboard them and stuff like that and train them is very costly. And so if there's a high turnover within companies of employees, that's a big, big cost that, doesn't always show up on the bottom line and stuff like that, right? Another aspect of this is that there's a diminished innovation and risk-taking by people in general, people, in the middle management and stuff like that, and certainly from the sort of a bigger perspective of the company, right? That innovation and risk-taking is diminished. Now, I highlight that because part of a company is to remain in business long-term, right? Like that's the goal. You want to be ongoing, the what Simon Sinek calls the infinite game. And by diminishing innovation and risk-taking, then you become stagnant, and eventually you erode yourself within the marketplace. It becomes like a self-fulfilling prophecy in some sense. And I'm going to talk about this in a little bit as it relates to the S&P 500 to kind of really illustrate that point. But as part of that also too, over time, there's a damage to company, the reputation. If people from the public side are seeing articles that, such and such company is letting people go, the employees themselves, will have stories, and clients, if they have stories, right? It all of a sudden has this trickle-out effect that you can't really measure, but it is a negative factor for the company. And also too, when you really look at it, right, the reason why I call it an uninspired solution is because it avoids the root cause of a lot of issues within the company, right? So while layoffs may address the immediate financial concerns, they often fail to tackle the underlying issues such as inefficient processes, declining product quality, or poor strategic decisions. By not identifying these and addressing the root causes, you may get temporary relief but without sustainable improvement, right? So that comes from Stanford as an observation. And by the way, in the description box, I'll link to all the various sources of where I'm pulling this, because it's not just out of my ass or anything like that. Okay, another sort of implication to, management and problem solving is that it's a missed opportunity for innovation. Leaders who default to layoffs overlook our alternative solutions like restructuring operations, investing in employee development, or exploring new markets. These alternatives can lead to long-term growth and stability, whereas layoffs, again, are just short-term financial gains. And, as I kind of highlighted, there's an impact on the credibility of leadership. The use of layoffs can signal not only to employees but stakeholders, right? That's we tout stakeholders as the pinnacle of what we're supposed to. A company is adherent to its stakeholders, and layoffs signal that management lacks strategic foresight and the ability to navigate challenges effectively, right? So then, people start to sell off stock and stuff like that, and a company really starts hemorrhaging, right? So it's you think you're having an intended effect of, okay, we're going to save money, but you start to signal panic to people, right? And that's not good. Now, let's really look at kind of the cost of it. So layoffs often fail to achieve the anticipated cost savings and may lead to increased expenses actually over time. So from the U.S. Conference Board, 30% of companies that implemented layoffs expecting cost savings actually saw an increase in expenses. And that's because oftentimes, you're having to then subcontract and stuff like that for various work and things of that nature. And in fact, 22% of companies laid off the wrong employees, leading to loss of valuable talent and costly rehiring practices, right? So, we just look at this as a easy solution, but it's not. It has such negative effects. Furthermore, companies that lay off employees do not experience better financial outcomes in the long term compared to those maintaining a stable workforce. Layoffs often result in neutral or negative immediate stock price returns, and profitability declines can persist for up to 3 years, and layoffs double the likelihood of bankruptcy compared to companies that avoid them. Okay? They double the likelihood. Like, it's insane to me that someone like me can just research this stuff and things of that nature, and the people in in these like big companies and these advisor roles like McKinsey and so forth, like that they tout these things as like, no, this is the solution. It's no different than, there's so much data about how diverse hiring practices leads to greater innovation and greater profitability, and yet we allow for racism and sexism and all that to impede that. Like it's asinine. We are literally shooting ourselves in the foot Because if the point is the bottom line, then increase profitability. Like what the hell? So earlier I alluded to the S&P 500, right? And we really look at like quarters and things like that of all of this, but really we should be looking at the long-term effects of all this. And the point of a company is to have a stable, financial life, right? Stability. And part of that, how we measure that is, the companies that are doing well, they're on the S&P 500. When you look at the longevity of various companies, there has been a significant decrease over the decades of that longevity. In the 1970s, the average company lifespan on the S&P 500 was about 35 years. Today, that tenure has shrunk to 20 years and is projected to decline to 15 years this decade alone. And that comes from McKinsey and other such research. Like, that's insane. And so decreasing company lifespans suggest increasing challenges in maintaining market position over time, right? Like, that's the idea. Well, when you're introducing instability via company layoffs, this is a byproduct of that. You start to, as I mentioned, you let go of that innovation and you're holding on for dear life as opposed to really giving a product or a service that clients, that companies would really, really want. And then the ability to retain talent and attract talent starts to become, hard, right? It's like, why would someone want to go to a company that is known for, essentially chaos, right? One sort of example of a lot of this, so I'm a soccer fan. Manchester United is a global brand, very successful back when Sir Alex Ferguson was the coach and, they had great management and stuff like that. Like, they were a well-oiled ship. And, I don't know all the ins and outs of it, but just from top down in the past decade, really, there's been a mismanagement of funds and how they recruit players, how they pay players, and cost cutting every which way, and it's really diminished the brand. And it's evident in terms of the results on the field. Like, they are bottom half of the English Premier League, which is very atrocious. That should not happen with a team as recognizable as Manchester United. Like, it makes no sense. And yet they've done poor decision after poor decision. And to turn that ship around, once you start going in that direction, it's very difficult to restabilize in that way. It has to be a long-term thing, and it's a lot of sacrifice and things like that. And again, we think layoffs are the sacrifice, but there's different ways to do it. And part of me doing this is to just make it known that, like, hey, layoffs are just kind of stupid, and like there has to be better solutions. And yeah, that we need to look at it, right? And also, one of the aspects that I haven't dug too deep into, but I imagine the severance packages, like, that's costly. And then in terms of our taxes, unemployment benefits and things like that, to me it's no different than how we subsidize low wages with food stamps and stuff like that. It's like, okay, companies can short shrift employees, but we as a society are really paying for that, right? So part of it is just awareness and spreading it, because I don't see this often talked about in this way. And it's not like I'm the best advocate to speak about this. I'm by no means an expert, but that's kind of the point. Like, if I can find this various data, and it's not just like the fringe, like, some of this data is coming from McKinsey themselves, which, look them up if you don't know what I'm talking about. And they're part of the company that usually makes these recommendations as their first solution, and they kind of invented it. I think it was John Oliver who did a wonderful segment on the history of McKinsey and these consulting firms and how kind of oddly insidious they are. But let's also consider like what do you do, like if you're an employee, and how you can kind of make like what action steps could you take. Well, if you're going to present this to your company, you have to present it as a business case, not a moral issue. And secondly, you have to offer solutions, right? So, presenting as much data as possible to be able to showcase it, right? So the things that I'm talking about, and again, there's plenty other data as well. I just cherry picked this stuff, to highlight as the big cases. But yeah, so we talk about the financial cost, the stock performance, the loss of talent and productivity, and then offering alternatives to layoffs, perhaps, voluntary pay cuts to executives and high earners, or short-term hiring freezes rather than workforce reductions, reducing bonuses and perks or non-essential expenses, right? Like that's better than laying people off. Operational readjustment, reskilling or reassigning employees to high priority areas. Like, feasibly you're letting people go because their services, you can do without, right? Like whatever those tasks are. Well, what if you, reassign them to what's the big project that's going to be the money maker, and like let's really go and make it, right? So implementing these, creating better efficiency measures that reduce costs without reducing headcount, right? Encouraging temporary unpaid leave or job sharing programs, diversifying revenue streams, right? Like when we talk, like a lot of startups, right? When we glamorize that early stage startup stuff, a lot of companies, in order to survive, have to pivot. So these actually can be opportunities. It's like, okay, we're doing X, Y, and Z, and why don't we, all of a sudden, like, let's put our brains together of what we can do to really make the company money and continue growth for the long term. And all of a sudden, if you put that workforce to groupthink and brainstorm and come up with all of this stuff, you never know what you might be like. It might be the next innovative thing. So, when you talk about these things, right, if you're presenting these things, make sure you align with the company's priorities, their long-term vision, their brand reputation, their innovation, stuff like that, right? You don't want to just pitch ideas that are near and dear to your heart, but you want to make sure that they resonate with the company itself. And also, part of it, presenting, maybe it's a trial run, like, hey, 3 to 6 months, like let's give this a go. And if it really, like, I'm not necessarily arguing that layoffs aren't a viable solution necessarily, but again, we just go to it as a first step and an immediate step, as if that's going to solve anything. So, maybe you try the alternatives first for a few months and see how it goes and readjust accordingly, and doing this in a private setting, right, and whatnot, through a formal proposal and stuff like that, you want to really make this as emotionless as possible to be able to present your argument if you're going to go along this route. But for me, I really, again, wanted to just open up the can of worms and really talk about this in such a way, because I don't see it talked about meaningfully, at least not at the capacity that I wish we talked about it. And by putting this more front and center, I think change can happen. So that's my intention with this, to start a domino effect. But I encourage you to comment down below, let me know your thoughts, your questions on any of this. I would love to really engage on this subject with you, again, because I think by doing so, it only leads to better outcomes ultimately. Thank you for taking time to tune in. I truly do appreciate you. I'll see you next time.